Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
You ever heard the term boiling a frog? Yeah, I know it's kind of gross, but particularly applicable to what I want to discuss in this week's episode regarding overhead and profitability. If you're not familiar with the term, it relates to the idea that a frog, if dropped in boiling water, will quickly jump out, whereas if you started them off in cooler water and slowly heated it, they would sit there until they were, boiled. And it's become a metaphor to explain how us humans will react immediately to an obviously bad situation, but fail to react to a situation that is gradually worsening. When I started out in the industry in the early 1990s, if you were to ask any dental guru what the overhead percentage should be for the average solo GP practice, you would have always heard invariably 50%. If you collected $60,000, you should be netting $30,000. And what's happened since then? Well, if you Google it now, you'll find multiple sources that list the ideal overhead at 61 to 65%. You can imagine if it's a newer practice, it'll be even higher. So how did this become okay all of a sudden? What changed? We could assign it to all kinds of things, staff pay is up, etc., but not really, relatively speaking. And truthfully, things like labs and supplies are far cheaper than they were back then. Again, relatively speaking, as a percentage of revenues. And it seems this problem has only become worse, especially the past 5 years. As you might imagine, as we onboard a new client, we attempt to isolate and then prioritize the key pain points that need to be addressed sooner than later. And you wouldn't find any of these pain points unfamiliar, new patients, case acceptance, staff, organizations, profit, etc. But what are we seeing now? Well, we're seeing the pain points of declining profitability and overhead problems in a higher percentage of new clients than in any year prior. And funny enough, we saw it more in 2024 than in 2023, and more in 2023 than in 2022, and so on. It's a problem that's been getting worse every year, especially for the past 4 or 5. So overhead as a percentage has been creeping up the past 20 plus years, and now this is only accelerated. So what gives? Well, that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode. I want to cover why overhead as a percentage for the average dental practice has steadily and now more quickly climbed the past 3 decades, along with what you can actually do about it. And yes, we'll even take a look at moves you can make that would give you that 50 to 55% overhead again, just like back in the day. My name is Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host. And the way I want to start this week may seem stupid or obtuse, but there are a few assumptions or really basic truths that we have to keep in mind while we look at all of this. What are these things? Well, number one, what's the profit formula? Profit formula is real simple. What you make minus what you spend is profit, right? Okay. Then 2, what you make, income, is the result of what you charge and get paid for, directly related to how much you charge and do and how much you get paid for it. Okay, that's your income. Number 3, if you want to increase profitability, you would A, increase income, or B, decrease expenses, or C, do a combination of both. Simple, right? Okay, so with this in mind, let's look at why overhead as a percentage has gone up over time. Sure, there could be things you're wasting money on or new things that you weren't having to pay for 20, 30 years ago, etc. And you should fix these things, of course. And, we do overhead sort outs where, we tamp down on categories that are too high or eliminate waste and things like this. But for the average U.S. dentist, the explanation for this gradually increasing overhead percentage is actually pretty simple. It's the proverbial elephant in the room, okay, which is most offices in the U.S. are in network. A lot of them are heavily in network. And because they're in network, they charge less than they would normally or should charge for any given service. And that messes with the income side of the profit equation. And to be clear, when I say what they should or would charge, most offices, even with their normal private fees, I've said this before on the podcast, don't even charge in the 40th or 50th percentile with their fees. If you've ever reviewed your fees, and you've probably done it at one point or another in your career, but it should be something that you do every year. But there are fee surveys out there, from the Wasserman Guide to Dental Economics has one, where you look by your zip code, by CDT code, and you look at what would be the average charge in your area? The average charge would be what would be called the 50th percentile. That means that half the offices in your area charge less than that, and half the offices in that area charge the same or more, okay? So a lot of people like to be in the 50th, 60th, or 70th percentile. When we get a new client in a lot of cases when we evaluate their fees, some of them aren't even in the 30th percentile for their average normal private fee, meaning that in their area, and these fee surveys are not just pulled out of thin air. They're built up based on actual fees. That means in their area, 70% of the offices are actually charging more, okay? So they're not even charging enough for their basic private fees. When you look at what their fees, quote unquote, should be, there's a reason they should be that because it keeps up with the way other expenses are rolling throughout the rest of society. And because these fees are so low and the fact that you're in network, it messes again with that income side of the profit equation, what you do and what you charge for what you do. And it's crept up like this for years. And funny thing is, the way software used to work, if when PPOs started to really get a foothold in the scene in the mid-90s, HMOs as well, but more PPOs, the way dental software worked is you didn't have multiple fee schedules with a lot of early softwares. You had a fee schedule. Okay. And it wasn't very usable like it is today, where you could do multiples or whatever, the 2740 in this plan is this or that or whatever. It was just your fee schedule. So what would happen is you'd have whatever your fee was, and when you'd bill your PPO that you were in network with, you'd charge them your normal fee. So let's say your normal fee for a crown in, 2001 was $800. That was your private fee. But your agreed upon in-network fee was $500. So, and it was covered as major service at 50%. So you'd bill the insurance company for $800. The patient would have paid you half of $500 because that's the agreed upon fee. So you got $250. Then the insurance company would pay you $250. What happened to that other $300? Well, you would just write it off. So you'd look at your, end of the month, your end of the month report, and you'd see that your production was, 150,000, but your collections were 110. We'd see this with clients all the time. And the usual culprit was write-offs. But the write-offs were obvious. You would see that you wrote off $40,000 that month or $500,000 that year. The write-offs were right in your face all the time based on your actual fee schedule. Okay. So, and also keep in mind too, when PPOs initially got on the scene, beyond HMOs and capitation plans, the write-offs usually weren't that bad. Sure, there were some, union plans or whatever, but I remember some that had a 10 or 15%, write-off. Your crown was $800 and the PPO was paying you $720 or $730. It was almost like a marketing fee. So it was really no big deal. So then the water in our boiling frog scenario started to get warmer. And the way it happened was this. It wasn't necessarily that reimbursement or fees were lowered by insurance companies like they have been in recent years. They were instead not raised. So if you had a decent plan, and the other thing is if you took a decent plan, some of these companies started throwing in other plans that you had to take from their company as well. So you had one plan that had a 10 or 15% write-off, but then you had to take the other ones that had a more severe write-off in order to participate. So between those two things, they lowered your fees that way by throwing in these not so good plans, and also by not increasing the reimbursement rate while costs marched forward. Your reimbursement rates weren't going up, so kind of in a very slow and gradual way, it was eating away at your profit, and as a percentage, your overhead looked higher and higher. So that's how it rolled. Costs kept going up, reimbursements didn't go up at the same clip unless you got really loud about it. And a whole industry has evolved as a result of this, like PPO negotiating companies, the idea, or fee negotiating companies. If you had talked about a company that would negotiate fees for you in 1995, people would have no idea what you were talking about. But now that you have so many people participating in network, there are actual companies, well, you know this, that will go and talk to the PPOs for you. But this has now bred a whole other issue, which are these umbrella networks. So you don't like this one or this fee schedule that you have with a major carrier that you're in network with. So you go to one of these PPO negotiating companies, and they negotiate you into one of these umbrella networks. So they get you out. So let's say you're getting, let's make up an insurance company name so I don't piss off any insurance companies. We'll call it Metna. How's that? Do you like that? It rhymes. So let's say your fee in Metna for 2740 is $800, right, for a crown. So you don't like that. So you want to get closer to $1,100. So what these PPO negotiating companies do is they will get you out of network at $800, then they'll re-enroll you as part of an umbrella network at $1,100. And this may carry with a couple of other carriers as well, big carriers. But these umbrella networks come with a bunch of other smaller plans as well, many of which you've never heard of. Now, ideally, or the way it was supposed to work, and we've seen this happen with clients, is you were supposed to get that same fee schedule more or less from all the different carriers in this network, but we're seeing it not quite play out that way. You know, you'll get your 1,100 from the top 2 or 3 carriers, but then, you know, there's this network that this company you'd never heard of that you're now all of a sudden in network with that you're only getting $700 for that same procedure for. Okay. And getting out of one of these umbrella networks is a heck of a lot harder than getting out of an individual plan. So the bottom line is, income became more static. Your income wasn't necessarily going up markedly. You may have been raising your private fees slightly. You might have seen increased reimbursement occasionally. Usually you find out about this by accident unless the insurance company tells you, just by charging more on your own. But costs kept going up. Now, the past 5 years, this has only been exacerbated. Why? Well, it's 2 basic reasons. One, we have some insurance companies reducing reimbursements. You know, I've talked about this on the show before. There's one in particular in the Northeast that I know that actually negotiated an overall 8% fee or reimbursement, rather, reduction with their in-network dentists. They then turned around and sold it to the employers as this big win. You know, look, we saved your employees money from these greedy dentists, right? So they actually lowered your reimbursement or what you're allowed to charge and income. And 2, inflation over the past 5.5 years has become a lot hotter, or was a lot hotter. So let me give you a comparative here. From March of 2020 through August of 2025, okay, the official government numbers on inflation are 26%. Now, not to sound bad or like a tinfoil hat guy, if it's published publicly at 26%, we know it's probably higher, okay? And you've probably seen anecdotally little videos on TikTok or Instagram Reels where you see people go to Walmart in 2019 and then they went in 2024 and it was 3 times as much. But the official numbers are 26% from March of 2020 through August of 2025. So it's a 5.5-year period. Let's look at the 5.5 years prior to that as a comparative. From September of 2014 through February of 2020, what was the inflation percentage? It was 9%. So we have 26% for the last 5.5 years and 9% for the 5.5 years prior. So we had this massive squeeze occur the last 5.5 years if you're a network where your reimbursements have gone down and inflation has gone up wildly as a comparison. And how are you seeing it? You're seeing front desk people that you used to pay $18 an hour where you have to now pay $25 or in some cases $30, or hygienists where it's $50 to $65 an hour. You've seen your costs for lab supplies, electricity, etc. go up. And maybe you haven't seen these to where you could pinpoint exactly which ones have gone higher, but if I were you, you have a P&L or your accountant does, you should be looking at this because this is something that needs to be confronted. It's not something that's going to go away. It's not you can't cover your head with a blanket and, hope it's like the boogeyman and they're going to leave you alone. These numbers are going up and you have to know exactly how much they're going up. It's the responsibility pill that you have to take as an owner. Sometimes it's not fun, but it's something that you have to be able to look at. Now, how has this affected overall profit or income or take-home pay for the average dentist? Well, okay. If you go to the ADA Health Policy Institute, there's a spreadsheet. I'm going to put a link to it on the episode webpage, and if it links to the page that this spreadsheet is on, and the spreadsheet is called Survey of Dental Practice, if you want to download this. It's actually quite informative. The ADA has some great stats. And the name of the spreadsheet officially is Income, Gross Billing, Expenses, Characteristics, etc. Okay. So let's look at dentist net pay, median annual net income for dentists. So from 2000, we're going to do this 5-year comparison period, 2014 to 19 and then 19 to 25, okay, or 24 rather, because they don't have 25 numbers out yet. In 2014, the average net income for a dentist was $160,000 a year. That's average, median net income. In 2019, the average net was $186,620. My editors don't like when I break it down into 20s and 10s or cents, but I just did, so there you go. So we went from 160 in 14 to 186,600 in 19. which was a $26,000 a year increase or 17%. Inflation during that same period was 9%. So dentists' income or net was actually exceeding inflation, okay, by almost double. Now, how about the last 5 years? In 2019, again, the net income was $186,620. In 2024, the net is $190,500. It's less than a $4,000 increase, or 2%. Inflation during this period has been 26%. So, 2% increase in income, 26% increase officially in costs. That's the reality. The average doctor's profit or net income is not keeping up with inflation, not even close. You're spending this 2% increase in net income into the teeth of a 26% increase in costs, both business-wise and personally. And that more or less explains what we've been seeing with these new folks that are coming in, and possibly to you. So what should you do about it? Well, let's take a look at something for a second. And we'll take it out of the dental realm for a minute. What would the average business do if costs were going up? They would pass it on to the consumer, right? If I had a restaurant and food and labor costs got higher, I'd simply charge more to my patrons, right? Voila, I'm done. Well, if you're a network, there's the rub, right? You can't do that. You can only do it for some of your patients, but not all, which is kind of weird when you think about it. And again, I'm not trying to compare a dental practice to a restaurant, but imagine, I've got some customers that are in network and they're paying $2 for a Coca-Cola, and the ones that are out of network are paying $10 for the Coca-Cola. I'm making my profit off the people that are willing to give me $10. So the solution you need here is you need to be able to control the income side of the equation, what you charge for your services. It's a basic tenet or operating law of business. If you can't do that, if you can't control what you charge, you can't control what your business's profitability or your business's overall health. And to do this, you have to get out of network. Now, I know this isn't, a lot of people have been jumping on this bandwagon. A lot of our competition or some of the other dental practice management, various people write articles and whatnot. I've been seeing more and more of this the last couple of years. We've been beating the drum heavily for years. Not that I'm trying to say we were the first ones, but this is something we used to recommend that our clients do, but it wasn't as big of a deal in 2015 or 16 or 13. Now it's a big deal. Now it's a very big deal. So you have to get out. And a couple things to know about this. Number one, why do most doctors not get out of network? Well, because, again, the people that are keeping you in network have a lot of money, okay? They've spent a lot of money on marketing to both your patients and to you. It creates a situation where you could feel somewhat scared. And I can empathize with this in the sense that in 1993, I remember when PPOs and HMOs were first getting a foothold in the industry. I remember talking to doctors that signed up for every plan that came across their desk because they were freaked out that if they were not in network, they would be locked out and they would lose all of their patients. Obviously, we know it didn't turn out that way, but that's how people felt. It's not unnatural to feel that way. Your future, your family's future, your staff's future, all depends on your ability to keep your practice going. So it puts you into this paralyzed state where you don't want to make the wrong move. At least you're doing something now and you're doing okay, but it's definitely keeping you from being the way that you want to be, and it's creating a lot of stress in your business that you should not have. A couple other things to know is if you get out of a plan, you will normally not lose more than 30% of the patients in that plan on average. That's a statistic we've proven time and again. It's not as bad as you think, okay? And the other joke is this: your overhead is probably actually 50%. And I say this, if you were able to charge full fee, you just don't see it anymore because this whole fee schedule thing, but if you were able to charge full fee for everything that you do and you looked at that versus your expenses, your overhead would probably be 50%. You'd be producing 150, but really 100 after all the adjustments, with an overhead of 75. It's 75%. If you were charging the 150, your overhead wouldn't go up because you'd just be charging more. Your overhead wouldn't go up as a result of that, and you'd be at 50% overhead, 75,000. And lastly, you have to be realistic as to where is all of this going. If you're playing this game, remember again, your opponents, the insurance companies and the insurance lobby, have a ton of money, and this is what they do full time. Again, look at these umbrella networks. To me, these are ingenious. You take a few bigger plans that pay okay, and then you toss in another 30 of them that don't pay well at all, and then you're locked in. It just makes it worse, With all of this going on, where do you see this going in the next 5, 10 years? I mean, really confront this. What is this going to look like? So to me, the best solution is just don't play the game. Quit trying, because people do. Let me go get a PPO negotiator. Let me do this. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. Really, it depends. And I'll get into this in a second. But I would rather just not play the game. That's the easier way to go, right? So the question is, how do you not play the game? How do you get out? Well, it's a very individualized process because no two offices are alike. One office may be very heavily involved in network, and it depends on the plans that they're in. Another might just have 10% of their patients in network. I will tell you it's far easier than you may think it is, but it really depends on the situation. Like, for instance, if 5% of your patients were coming from an in-network plan, you could probably drop that and not even think about it. If 85% of your patient traffic is in network, well, that has to be thought about because you want to do it in a way where you can sleep at night and you're comfortable. Now, the cool thing is, and we do this with clients all the time, if it's done correctly while you're dropping plans, what do you think is going to happen? Obviously, if you're dropping plans, your charges will go up, right? What you're charging for various services. But what do you think will happen to your profitability immediately? You might go, well, long-term, my profitability will go up. But what do you think would happen to your profitability immediately or revenues immediately? Well, with the clients we do this with, in most cases, their profit and their revenues go up immediately as they start to drop plans. And their costs go down because instead of doing 2 crowns for $800 a crown, they're doing 2 crowns for $2,600 a crown. Okay, so instead of $1,600, they're making $2,600. Their income goes way up, and they're not losing patients. There's intelligent ways to do this. We've done this for a ton of clients, and there's a lot of tools in this toolbox, from marketing, reactivation, teaching the staff how to talk to patients when you move out of network, working with your fee schedule in a certain way where you adjust certain fees and other ones you don't. There's a number of different things you do. Again, we've talked about some of this stuff before in episodes 138, 142, and 173. I've had Sabri on with me to go through this because she does this with a lot of our clients. All I can tell you, it is very easy and it is very doable, but it does take some work, right? If it were me and I was heavily involved, it wasn't just, 5% of my practice, I'd probably reach out for some help because it can be scary. We do have a service called the Fees and Plans Analysis. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. We walk you through this whole process. And heck, I've talked to Sabri. If you want to just talk to her directly and find out, what would we tell you to do? Her email address, I'll put on the episode webpage. It's sabrib@mgeonline.com. You can also email me, jeffb@mgeonline.com, and we can walk you through, based on your situation, kind of where we would go with this. Because it's not magic. It's not like we're going to do some undefined strange thing. The actions are going to be very simple, but they're very doable actions. We've done it for tons of clients, and it's such a freedom, I can't tell you, to be able to charge what you think you should be charging for your services and run your practice the way that you want to run it without having an insurance company meddle. So in my mind, the iceberg is there, right? But the good news is you're not the Titanic and you have plenty of time to avoid said iceberg. It's way off in the distance and resume with smooth sailing. But you need to start taking action sooner than later. So my advice is don't procrastinate. Take actions. Check out the Fees and Plans Analysis. Email one of us, because keep in mind, obviously we want you to be successful for your future, but a lot of people depend on you. Not just yourself, but your family, your team, and your patients as well. So making some small steps today can ensure that it turns out the best for one and all. Anyway, that's all I have for you this week. If you want to find out more, I put those links on the episode webpage to that spreadsheet as well as the Fees and Plans Analysis. If you want to find out more about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.